Welcome to the Global Startup Movement. I'm Andrew Berkowitz. My guest today is Allie Burns. Allie is the Managing Director for Village Capital, where she helps to lead Village Capital's extensive entrepreneurial programs all around the world. She previously served as a senior executive at Revolution and the Case Foundation, as well as senior positions with AOL, the Travel Channel, and Startup America. Allie, thank you so much for inviting me here.
My pleasure. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed your panel discussion at the Africa FinTech Summit. When it comes to the African tech markets, what kind of what about that scene has caught Village Capital's attention over the past couple of years?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that really excites us about FinTech in particular in Africa is that we're now going beyond payments. So there's been a ton of excitement around what's happened in the payment space, a lot of leapfrogging in terms of lack of infrastructure in the financial system, allowing for mobile payments to grow really fast and to expand access to low and middle income consumers to the convenience and benefits of payments. But what we're excited about is seeing companies that are growing and using now this leapfrogged infrastructure to actually provide credit to small businesses, to provide a sort of more equal value chain for micro businesses, and to provide access to credit for consumers. So how do we turn the convenience of mobile payments into ways to build wealth for businesses and for consumers? So that's one of the things that excites us in the fintech space. In Africa more generally, I think we constantly believe that it's an overlooked space for startups. It's a challenging market to invest in, but there's also a ton of innovation happening in the region. We've invested mostly in East Africa, but we're also really excited about what's happening in West and Southern Africa in terms of the merging of technology and big sectors of the economy. So whether it's agriculture, whether it's education, whether it's health, or financial services, we're really excited about what we're seeing there.
Right. So I've heard not just in Africa, in emerging markets all around the world, I hear complaints from entrepreneurs that there's just not enough capital available, but I also hear complaints from VCs that there's just not enough quality deal flow.
Yeah.
Where do you think the gap is right now, or what's the problem?
Yeah, I think this actually comes down to a problem that we talk about a lot at Village Capital of pattern recognition. So VCs are looking for a very specific pattern that they're used to seeing in the Silicon Valley type model. And Africa is not Silicon Valley. You can't just cut and paste a model into another region where the governments are completely different, the markets are completely different, the consumer preferences and the culture is completely different. So when most VCs say there aren't investable deals, it's because they're looking for a specific model that doesn't make sense in those particular markets. So I think the investors that will find the deals in sub-Saharan Africa are those that are open to thinking about different types of structure, that are thinking about capital that it stays in companies longer versus the sort of more quick bang for the buck extractive capital that is sort of the model of a lot of VCs right now.
Right. And this was a conversation I was having this morning with Aubrey Huby of the Atlantic Council. I think that I think just the broader market really underestimates the localization factor and how much of an advantage African startups actually have over their Western counterparts of understanding the local markets, where there are just so many Silicon Valley-esque ideas that you bring to Nigeria and it just doesn't make sense. Right. And so I think that what you all do with having your entrepreneurs decide, who you all invest in is so powerful, especially providing those on the ground knowledge and having entrepreneurs operating. So I guess talk to me a little bit about your experience in Nairobi in particular, because I know Village Capital has a pretty big presence in Kenya.
Yep. So we've been in Kenya for really almost since the beginning of Village Capital. So we were founded in 2009. I think we started running programs in Kenya in about 2012. And we've been investing largely in agriculture and in fintech, and in sort of the intersection between those markets. So we're seeing a lot more fintech applications for other sectors that we're interested in too, whether it's health or education. What we've seen is a lot of promising young companies trying to do innovative things, whether it's a company like Paygo, which is working on how do you get pay-as-you-go technology into urban slums by providing a replacement for dangerous cooking sources like kerosene.
Right.
We see that these companies get a lot of early traction, but when it comes to finding growth capital, we kind of touched on this, that they're getting stuck. That the capital isn't available beyond sort of a small set of investors to get them to the point where they really need to invest in the infrastructure that they need to grow and to build out their talent, their pool of talent, and invest in talent. So those are sort of the two places that they're getting stuck. But we're really excited about the pipeline of companies that we continue to see that are building really innovative things in the region.
Yeah. So I read a Medium article that you put out a couple months ago about the challenge around recruiting in emerging markets and finding talent.
Yeah.
You know, one, I guess, concept that I've been thinking about a lot, and I think this would work well in a lot of different African markets, is what I'll call quote unquote early stage M&A.
Yep.
Where you might have two very talented teams of like 2 or 3, whereas if they kind of merged into one team, they would have, you know, the leverage, we'll say, to actually go out and raise that growth capital.
Yeah.
So I mean, what do you think of in terms of fixing that problem of lack of talent and just like finding good, you know, good engineers, good business development people in emerging markets?
Yeah, I think talent is certainly a challenge and a barrier to growth for a lot of companies that are operating in Africa, and I think it's less of an issue that the talent doesn't exist, but more that the talent is going to the established companies. There are a lot of great universities in Nairobi. A lot of folks who grow up in Nairobi, are educated in Western markets, get really great educations, want to come back, but don't necessarily feel like they can take the risk to go work at a startup. It's not sort of culturally as exciting as it is here in the US, for example, to go work for a startup. Most folks who come out of a traditional educational background are taught that like they should go into a big corporate, they should go where it's safe, where they're going to get benefits, where they have a very clear career ladder. There is sort of a lack of education on what's possible. And part of that is also the lack of exits, right? One of the incentives to get people to come to a startup is you get equity, so you might work for nothing for a while or barely anything for a while, but you're going to get equity, and when the companies go gangbusters, you know, you'll be paid back for all of that hard work, and that hasn't happened yet in Africa. So a lack of example to understand sort of the benefit of taking that risk to go into a startup. So I think, one, just hoping that plays out sooner versus later to bring some of the talent that exists. And then in terms of talent development, I think particularly for startups, creating sort of there's a lot of momentum in Nairobi in particular around creating more resources for startups to help each other develop talent and to share sort of common challenges and common resources to make sure that there's a pool of talent that they're developing that can go potentially from one startup to another or be shared amongst companies. So Open Capital Advisors, I don't know if you know those guys, but they're doing some really interesting things in terms of thinking about how to provide talent, particularly when it comes to financial management. So a lot of startups will go from sort of the very early stage to a stage where they're growing but not quite ready for a CFO, for example. So how do they access the talent they need on the financial and accounting side? Open Capital Advisors is helping them provide essentially externships and put people into companies that will help them fill a temporary gap while they build out the company and build out sort of their infrastructure.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, I do see the ecosystems are getting more mature. I agree. I mean, I hope it plays out sooner rather than later. One thing that I hope doesn't happen is Africa following kind of what's happened in India, where there are like 4 or 5 startups that get 95% of all the venture capital. But I think corporates, especially with Naspers liquidation of some of their 10-cent shares, are in a good opportunity now to, at least have a smaller venture arm that they can provide some liquidity and start the momentum of more capital locally getting active.
Yeah, I think so. Unfortunately, when it comes to venture capital writ large going into Africa, we actually did a study on this, particularly looking at digital financial services companies, and 90+% of the money that was put into startups in the fintech space in Africa actually went into like 5 companies over the last 2 years. So there's obviously a high concentration. Most of those companies were expat founded, by the way. So you're not seeing a movement of local capital into a large number of companies yet, but I think if local capital gets activated, activating them around local founders, I think it's going to be really important. And to your point, how do you let 1,000 flowers bloom versus just having concentration into a couple of companies, like has happened in India?
Yeah, I mean, I saw the same thing with expats on the ground when I was in Nairobi. I think expats and then the diaspora coming back is at least steps in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Where, worst case scenario, one of them produces an exit, that makes headlines, and now people are at least paying attention to what's happening there.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah.
But I would love to hear more about, I know you're starting a new program called VilCap Communities Africa, right? I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. So we actually ran a global pilot a couple of years ago called VilCap Communities, essentially around this idea that we could take the curriculum that we've built for the companies that we find, train, and invest in, and provide that to other entrepreneur support organizations who would essentially run a village capital program using our curriculum and using our peer selection methodology. So they have access to the technology that we've built around the peer rank process, and found a lot of interest, particularly in emerging markets, around taking something that had already been built versus starting a new entrepreneur support organization and starting curriculum from scratch. We have a proven model, we have a unique model, one that has played itself out when you look at our portfolio in terms of the quality of investments that the model is delivering. So we've been funded by DFID to actually expand this model more significantly in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're really excited to be launching applications very soon for local entrepreneur support organizations throughout sub-Saharan Africa to apply to be one of our VilCap communities.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's I think something that's really needed right now in the ecosystems there. So I do want to touch on the clean tech report as well that you guys just put out.
Yep.
We had kind of a boom and bust cycle already in the clean tech space back in 2008, and so I think which is how all technologies get adopted, right? There's that initial kind of boom bust, and now slowly over time the capital starts to come back in, and I think we're finally at that point where we're in the second inflection point where the good companies are actually going to come out of. But can you tell me a little bit about just the your takeaways from that whole study that you all did?
Yeah, we agree. Sort of shifting from the other side of the world in Africa to here in the U.S., which this report covered, as you mentioned in 2008, Inconvenient Truth came out. People were really excited about clean tech. There were a lot of people in the traditional venture space that put money into companies that didn't necessarily understand the nuances of the market and sort of the type of capital that was required. Wasn't necessarily a fit for sort of your traditional venture model, and we saw companies go under and people get scared away, significant decline in the amount of money that was going into clean tech companies at that period of time. But as you noted, we've started to see an uptick, and we're particularly excited about this energy and transportation network nexus. We're never going to stop moving, and we're never going to stop going places, right? We're going to take planes, we're going to take trains, we're going to take automobiles, and that's going to create a need for more efficient and more effective solutions around how do we make it, one, less expensive for us to move around in an energy efficient way. So we're really excited about what we're seeing, whether it's in the aviation sector with experimentation around electric planes, which I think, commercial aviation that's powered by electricity, really interesting. Electric vehicles. So obviously we've seen a cyclical process even with Tesla not having the best quarter because batteries, for example, are for electric cars are really expensive. They're really heavy. So how do we make them lighter, more efficient, longer range? Charging stations and sort of charging solutions is another sector that we're really interested and excited about, and we're starting to see the capital come back in, and we're starting to see capital that has a better understanding of the nuances. So like Breakthrough Energy Ventures, that's actually looking at a longer time horizon to invest in these companies versus sort of your traditional 10-year horizon for a straight venture firm.
But I mean, your thesis in the space is more so that venture capital can come in and create a lot of value on the energy usage and efficiency side, as opposed to the actual creation of
I
energy
think that's
there.
right.
Okay. Yeah, and that definitely makes sense. So, I mean, what other, within the whole clean tech umbrella, like what are you most excited about?
That's a good question.
Because, I mean, clean tech, I mean, that covers a lot of different areas.
Yeah, and that's why we really focus specifically on energy and transportation and sort of sitting at the middle of that. So looking at, there's also what's the next generation of ride sharing. So we've got Uber, we've got Lyft, and that's obviously been very transformational, but what will be built off of that? One of the companies that participated in our last energy program was focused specifically on how do you create ride sharing for communities of parents and kids to do carpooling. So I think there's a lot of more traditional venture model companies coming out of ride sharing. Uber and Lyft aren't going to be the end all of ride sharing, so that's another area that we're excited about.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that clean tech really aligns with the concept that I really like that you talked about, two-pocket thinking.
Yes.
Right? So we'll say traditionally, high net worth individuals thought out of two pockets: their nonprofit charity pocket and then their, business capitalism for-profit pocket.
Yeah.
But you seem to think that we're in a time period where, with the way where technology is going, that could be the same pocket, and you can make a lot of money solving a big problem in the world.
Absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit?
Yeah, I always really loved, well, first of all, I worked for Steve and Jean Case, who were really early thinkers in impact investing, particularly at the early stage, and have done a ton to build the field in impact investing. But I always really liked a quote by Piero Midiar where he talked about, I hate the term giving back because it inherently implies that I'm taking away at some point, and why can't I build a company and build wealth not just for myself but for the people who work in my companies and give back at the same time? Why does it have to be sort of extractive and subtractive? And we've always thought at Village Capital, and Ross Barrett, our founder, talks about one pocket thinking, that you can create value, both monetary value and value for the world, through the one pocket, through investing, through using a number of different tools, whether it's different investment structures, whether it's a combination of grants and philanthropy. Our model at Village Capital is very indicative of one pocket thinking. We focus on finding and training entrepreneurs who will have significant impact around the world through a philanthropic vehicle, and we have an investment vehicle that does more traditional venture investments. So sort of we're the living example of one pocket thinking, and the folks who support us are thinking in the one pocket way.
So, I mean, are there certain KPIs or like quantitative metrics that you would like say, like, we're investing in this company, obviously we want a return, but like these are the KPIs that show that we're making, social impact. You know what I mean?
We do, and it's one of the things, excuse me, it's one of the things that we work on with the companies that we support is how we're not interested in a model where impact is an afterthought. So, you buy something, you give something, you give something away. We want the business success to be inherently impactful. And we help companies think about how they articulate their vision in that particular way, and what some of the early metrics that they should apply to their business to actually think about, are they having impact? I mean, there are basic metrics like job creation. If they're in the energy space, obviously thinking about sort of energy efficiency specific metrics. If they're focused on low and middle income consumers, like specifically looking at how many low and middle income consumers they're serving. But those will change over time. Obviously, impact is a long game. You don't create significant transformational change in a sector like education or food and ag or health in 5 years or sometimes even 10 years. So we also help them think about metrics in a way that are iterative over time.
Awesome. Well, Allie, thank you so much for having me here. Let's do this. We'll finish off. I just want to hear your vision for kind of the impact that you want to have and you see Village Capital being able to make over the next 5 years in the world.
Yeah. So I think Village Capital, we as I mentioned, we find, train, and invest in entrepreneurs, and I think our impact can be far more than the $18 million that we have in investment capital to deploy. We have a proven model not only for finding and selecting companies who have the potential to make significant change in the world, But we've also done things very differently. So the peer selection model and flipping the power dynamic has really helped us to think about how do you get more people access to capital who have really great ideas and are currently being overlooked by the current system. So we really want to reinvent the way that we back the entrepreneurs of the future.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.